He should have died that day. His plane was destroyed. His crew was gone. A German fighter had him in his sights. One squeeze of the trigger and it would be over. But the trigger never came. Instead, something impossible happened. The enemy became his guardian, and 40 years later, he would cross an ocean to find the man who spared his life. December 20th, 1943, the sky over Germany is a killing field. American B-17 bombers fly in massive formations, protected by layers of fighters. But protection means nothing when you're crippled, when your engines are dying and your altitude is dropping, when German fighters circle like wolves around wounded prey. This is where 2nd Lieutenant Charlie Brown finds himself, 21 years old, first mission as aircraft commander, and about to experience something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. His bomber, named Ye Old Pub, is barely flying. Half the crew is wounded. The tail gunner is dead. 2 engines are gone. The controls respond sluggishly. They are losing altitude over enemy territory with no chance of reaching England. Every man on that plane knows what comes next. German fighters will finish them, or they will crash. Either way, this is the end. Then a German Messerschmitt Bf 109 pulls alongside, close enough that Brown can see the pilot's face. The German is staring at the crippled bomber, examining the damage, calculating. Brown waits for the guns to fire, for the final attack. Instead, the German pilot does something that makes no sense. He gestures, points, signals for Brown to follow him, and then he escorts the American bomber towards safety. The bomber that should not exist mission started like dozens of others that month. 21 B-17s from the 379th Bombardment Group took off from England before dawn. Their target, a German aircraft factory near Bremen. Strategic bombing. Destroy the factories. Cripple production. Win the war through air power. The theory was clean. The reality was brutal. German fighters hit them before they reached the target. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s diving through the formation. Cannon fire tearing through aluminum skin. Bombers exploding. Men dying. Brown's plane took hits immediately. 1 engine damaged. Hydraulics failing. But they pressed on. Dropped their bombs. Turned for home. That is when it got worse. A German fighter made a head-on attack. Cannon shells ripped through the nose of the plane. The plexiglass shattered. Freezing air at 27,000 feet poured into the cockpit. The navigator was hit. The radio operator wounded. The nose gunner unconscious from lack of oxygen. More attacks came. The tail gunner, a young man named Hugh Eckenrode, fired until a 20mm shell exploded in the turret. He died instantly. Another engine was hit. Then a third. The B-17 dropped out of formation, trailing smoke. Alone. Defenseless. The perfect target. Brown fought the controls. The plane wanted to spin. To fall. He used every bit of strength to keep it level. They dropped below 10,000 feet. 8,000. 6,000. The remaining fighters kept attacking. Shells punched holes through the wings, through the fuselage. 1 round came through the cockpit and passed between Brown and his co-pilot, without hitting either of them. Impossible luck. Or maybe just delayed death. At 1,000 feet, the attacks suddenly stopped. Brown did not know why. Maybe the German fighters were out of ammunition. Maybe they assumed the bomber was finished. It did not matter. The plane was still flying. Barely. Damaged beyond anything Brown had seen, but still in the air. He turned northwest, toward England, toward the North Sea, 300 miles away. The enemy who became a guardian, Franz Stigler, was already an ace. 27 kills, experienced, skilled, dangerous. He had taken off that morning from an airfield near Bremen. His orders were simple: intercept the American bombers. Shoot them down. He had done it many times before. It was war. It was his job. He spotted the crippled B-17 limping away from the main battle. Easy target. Defenseless. He increased throttle and climbed toward it. Attack position. His finger rested on the trigger. Then he got close enough to see inside. The tail gun was destroyed. The turret mangled. He could see the body of the gunner still inside. He moved closer, looked through the holes torn in the fuselage. Wounded men inside, blood on the walls, some barely moving. He flew alongside the cockpit, made eye contact with the pilot, a young man, terrified, fighting to keep the plane level. Stigler had a choice. He could shoot. It would be quick. The B-17 would go down. Another kill added to his record. Another step toward the Knight's Cross. He had earned his reputation by being ruthless, by being effective. This should be simple, but something stopped him. Maybe it was seeing the wounded. Maybe it was the memory of something his commanding officer once said. You are fighter pilots first. Last, always. If I ever hear of any of you shooting at someone in a parachute, I will shoot you myself. This bomber was not much different from a parachute. It was already dead. The men inside were just trying to survive long enough to reach the ground. Stigler made his decision. He would not shoot, but he also would not just leave. The bomber was flying over German territory. Anti-aircraft guns would fire at it. Other fighters might attack. If he wanted these men to live, he needed to protect them. He pulled alongside again. Closer this time. He gestured to Brown, tried to signal, follow me. Land in Germany. Become prisoners. You will survive. Brown shook his head, pointed north. He was going to try for England. Stigler understood. He would do the same. So Stigler did something extraordinary. He escorted the American bomber. He flew close enough that German anti-aircraft gunners could see him, see that a German fighter was alongside. They held their fire. Confused, uncertain, Stigler stayed with the B-17 across German territory, past the guns, past the defenses, toward the coast. Asterisk, the salute that changed everything. We reached the North Sea, open water. The moment when Stigler had to turn back or risk running out of fuel. He pulled alongside one final time, made eye contact with Brown again, and then he did something that Brown would never forget. He saluted, a simple gesture, pilot to pilot, one warrior acknowledging another. Then Stigler rolled his fighter and disappeared back toward Germany. Brown sat in stunned silence. What just happened made no sense. An enemy fighter pilot had saved them, protected them, escorted them to safety. In the middle of a war where both sides showed little mercy, where bombers burned cities and fighters shot down parachuting pilots, this German had chosen compassion, had risked his own court-martial or worse to let them live. The flight back to England took 2 more hours. The plane barely made it. They crossed the coast with almost no fuel, landed at the first airfield they found. When ground crews saw the damage, they could not believe the B-17 had flown at all. Over 100 holes in the aircraft, multiple engines destroyed, hydraulics gone, half the controls non-functional. It should have been impossible. Brown reported what happened. The German fighter that escorted them. The salute. Some officers were skeptical. Maybe Brown was confused from stress. Maybe he imagined it. But the crew confirmed it. They all saw the German pilot. All witnessed the escort. It happened. The question was, why? Brown never forgot. The memory stayed with him through the rest of the war, through 46 more missions, through the decades that followed. He became haunted by a simple question. Who was that pilot? And was he still alive? Asterisk, the search that took 40 years. Brown returned to civilian life after the war. He became a diplomat, started a family, built a career. But he never stopped thinking about the German pilot. He told the story occasionally, to friends, to family. Most listened politely, but did not understand why it mattered so much. It was just one moment in a war full of moments, but to Brown, it was everything. That pilot had given him his life, had spared his crew, had shown mercy when none was expected or required. Brown needed to know who he was, needed to understand why he did it, and most of all, needed to say thank you. The problem was impossible. He knew nothing useful. A German fighter pilot, flying near Bremen in December 1943. It could be anyone from dozens of units, hundreds of pilots, and that was assuming the man survived the war. Most fighter pilots did not. The odds of finding him were essentially zero. Brown tried anyway. He wrote letters, contacted veteran organizations, reached out to German military archives. Nothing. No records that helped. No names that matched. Years passed, then decades. The trail was cold. Most people would have given up. Brown kept searching. In 1986, 43 years after the incident, Brown attended a reunion of bomber crews. He told the story again. This time, someone suggested a new approach. Write about it? Publish the story in a newsletter that German fighter pilots might read. Maybe someone would remember. Maybe someone knew something. Brown was skeptical, but he had tried everything else. He wrote a detailed account of what happened, the date, the location, the damage to his bomber, the escort, the salute. He sent it to a newsletter called Jägerblatt, Fighter Pilot Newsletter, a publication read by former Luftwaffe pilots. He did not expect anything, but for months later, a letter arrived from Canada. Asterisk. The letter that solved the mystery. Franz Stigler had survived the war. Barely. He flew until the last weeks, witnessed the collapse of Germany, lost friends, lost his country in many ways. After the war, he immigrated to Canada, started over, built a new life. He never talked about what he did during the war. Too painful, too complicated. Most people did not want to hear about German veterans anyway. Then in 1990, his wife showed him an article, a story from an American bomber pilot looking for a German fighter pilot who spared him in 1943. The details matched. The date, the location, the damaged B-17. Stigler read it and felt something break open inside him. He had carried that memory for 47 years, never knowing if the American crew survived, never knowing if his decision mattered. He wrote to Brown immediately, described the incident from his perspective, explained why he did it, why he could not shoot at wounded men in a crippled plane, why he risked everything to escort them to safety. The letter was honest, direct. It carried the weight of decades. When Brown received it, he wept. After 47 years, he had his answer. The pilot was alive. His name was Franz Stigler, and he had been carrying the same memory, the same questions, the same need to know what happened to the men in that bomber. They arranged to meet. Brown flew to Seattle. Stigler drove from Vancouver. Two old men who had not seen each other in nearly half a century, who last met over German territory with guns between them. They met in a hotel lobby, recognized each other instantly, not from appearance. They had both aged, but from something else, a connection that transcended time. They embraced. To former enemies, two men who shared one of the most important moments of their lives, and they began talking, comparing memories, filling in details, understanding what the other had experienced. The friendship was immediate, deep, built on something most people never experience. Brothers from different sides. Brown and Stigler spent the rest of their lives as close friends. They visited each other regularly, attended reunions together, told their story to schools and veteran groups. They appeared on television, in documentaries. Their story became famous to men from opposite sides of history, connected by a moment of mercy. But for them, it was more than a story. Stigler had given Brown his life. Brown had given Stigler validation, proof that his decision mattered, that choosing mercy over duty, compassion over hatred, was the right thing even in the middle of war. They needed each other in ways that went beyond friendship. They called each other brothers, talked on the phone weekly, shared holidays. When Stigler's health declined, Brown was there. When Brown faced his own struggles, Stigler supported him. They became family, not despite the war, but because of what they chose to do during it. In 2008, Franz Stigler died. Brown was devastated. He had lost the man who saved him, the man who became his brother. 8 months later, Charlie Brown followed, as if he could not exist without the connection they shared. They are buried thousands of miles apart, but their story remains linked forever. What they left behind. The story of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler is not just about one bomber and one fighter. It is about choice, about the moment when following orders meets human conscience, about what happens when someone decides that mercy matters more than victory. Stigler could have shot down that bomber. It was expected, legal. His duty as a soldier. He would have been praised, maybe decorated. Instead, he chose to protect men who were his enemies, men whose side was bombing his cities, his country, his people. He chose their lives over his orders. That choice cost him nothing immediately, but it could have. If other German pilots had seen, if his commanders had found out, he risked court-martial, execution. The Nazi military did not tolerate mercy toward the enemy. Stigler knew this. He did it anyway. Brown never forgot that mercy saved him, saved his crew, gave them the chance to go home, to live full lives, to have families. Everything that came after that day existed because one enemy chose not to pull the trigger. The lesson is uncomfortable for how we think about war. We want clear sides, heroes and villains, right and wrong. Brown and Stigler show that real war is more complex, that enemy soldiers are still human, that the man trying to kill you might also be the man who saves your life. That honor and compassion do not disappear just because you are on opposite sides. Their story spread after they found each other. Books were written, films were made, but the core of it remains simple. Two men met as enemies. One spared the other. Decades later, they found each other again and became brothers, not through shared nationality or shared cause, but through shared humanity recognized in the middle of inhuman circumstances. December 20th, 1943, a day that should have ended in death. A crippled bomber, a German fighter, one trigger pull away from the end. But the trigger never came. Instead came mercy. 47 years of searching, a letter from across an ocean, and a friendship that proved something important, that even in war, especially in war, the choice to see the humanity in your enemy can create bonds stronger than the hatred that started the conflict. Charlie Brown found the German pilot who saved him, and in finding him, both men found something they had been missing for half a century: understanding, validation, brotherhood, not despite what happened that day, but because of it. Because one man chose mercy when war demanded killing, and the other never stopped being grateful for that choice.